Hi, perhaps you recognize me. It's your favorite president.
We will decide who comes to this country and the circumstances in which they come.
And if the yes vote is successful, we will be divided forever.
What does confrontation mean? It means you fight for what you believe.
We've got Trumpomania running this country, brother.
Unless you're scripted, you're useless.
I was saved by God to make America great again.
We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender.
G'day everyone, my name is Stephen Tripp. Welcome back to Commanding the Narrative. It's a pleasure to have you all watching. If you are watching this live, you can contribute today's conversation in the chat, or the link to StreamYard is already in the chat if you want to call in, ask a question, or even just have your say. But we've got a very important international guest with us tonight, so I want to get through the introductions very quickly so we can dive straight in. So I'll kick it off the way that we always do, is by letting you know how you can support us by heading to Buy Me a Coffee. If you want to go to Buy Me a Coffee and throw us a few dollars there, it helps to pay for the stream, it helps to pay for the website, and most importantly, gives me a warm and fuzzy feeling inside, which is very, very important indeed. If you'd like to donate to us directly, you can head to the website and hit the donate button. There's some other options there if you want to go around Buy Me a Coffee. Some people like Buy Me a Coffee, some others don't. So if you are one of those people that don't, you can head straight to the website. While you're there, you might as well hit the sign up button in the top right-hand corner and sign up to the newsletter. You can stay up to date with everything that we do, all our recent podcasts, any articles that I might write, and also upcoming podcasts that you might find here at the upcoming events page. If you are searching for the link to one of the live streams, or just want to know who we're going to interview next, you head to the website. It's the best place to go. Don't rely on social media. I should also let you know that the Freedom Rally that was planned for February is cancelled. The one that we were having down in Canberra, unfortunately, that the organisers had to cancel that event. So please don't head down to Canberra, and please spread the word for anyone that was heading down to Canberra. Please don't go, because that event is cancelled. Also, the Australians for Better Government is going very, very well. Of course, Kevin Loughrey is part of that with me and a bunch of other great people pushing ahead for governmental reform. Please head to the website and sign up to be a member. Membership is currently free. It's not going to, it'll probably change early Feb. We will have to incur a charge with the membership. So if you want to be a foundation member and show your support from the very beginning, please go to the website, sign up to be a member. We're actually hosting our first members meeting tomorrow. So you can contribute directly to Australians for Better Government. So it's an excellent initiative that we're trying to put together. So please be involved. And just quickly before we get going, I just want to let everyone know, and this is a little bit applicable to what we're going to be discussing today. Chris Bowen, of course, is the Labor member for McMahon. He's the Climate Change and Energy Minister. He's a big reason why we're facing so many energy issues here in Australia. A good candidate has popped up to go up against him. He's an independent, and I was out in Fairfield yesterday to endorse him. Matthew Kamanzuli is going to be running against Chris Bowen at the upcoming federal election. So I completely endorse Matthew and everything that he's trying to achieve out of McMahon. So please head to Matthew's website, matthewkamanzuli.com. If you'd like to volunteer or contribute in any way, you can contact Matthew there on the website, or follow him on X and keep up to date with everything that Matthew is doing. All right, let's get into it. A big international guest, Tony Heller, who's a lifelong environmentalist. He's a whistleblower, and also a geologist who is concerned, or is considered as a heretic by the people that push this climate change narrative, only because he's willing to push back against the narrative. And of course, here on Commanding the Narrative, we push back against the narrative all the time, and that's what we're all about. So let's introduce both Kevin Loughrey and Tony Heller. Welcome to Commanding the Narrative, Tony.
Yeah, it's good to be here, Stephen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us all the way from the US. Kevin, thank you also for joining us. You're always a wealth of knowledge, and you contribute so much to this show, and you've helped facilitate this interview. So thank you very much, Kevin.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for making all this happen. By the way, I should tell you that Tony once was an auditor for Intel on their chips. And believe me, that puts him in like the top 15% of electrical engineers, electronic engineers. It's amazing. I had a lot to do in the ASICs area at one stage in my career. So I am absolutely honoured and privileged to be sitting here with Tony Heller tonight. It's terrific. Thank you, Tony, very much for making the time for us.
Well, thank you, Kevin, for inviting me.
Now, Tony, for people who might not know you, who is Tony Heller?
Well, I have degrees in science and engineering, and I've been doing science and engineering professionally for about 50 years. A lot of problems with very large data sets. Like Kevin mentioned, I used to design microprocessors for Intel and IBM and Motorola and a number of other companies. I've worked on quite a few different, I have a degree in geology. I've done, early in my career, I did a lot of geology work on quite a few different topics: energy development, nuclear waste disposal, geothermal energy. So I've been pretty fortunate that I've had a very wide, varied background in science, engineering, and education. I worked as a school teacher for a number of years too. So I've been able to, I get bored pretty quickly with doing one thing. So I've been, fortunately, I can't even remember all the different jobs I've had. So
No, that's a good sign. I was on your website and I read a bit of your bio, and I noticed that you worked on some climate and weather models for the US government in the past. This is what a lot of these people that are pushing this climate narrative are relying upon. In your view, can we rely on these climate models?
well, basically the climate models are the same as the weather models, with a few extra parameters put in. But you know how good weather models are. They're good for a few days. Maybe if you get lucky, they're good for a week or 10 days. But trying to run them for longer periods of time than that is absurd, because it's a chaotic system. Nobody really understands what causes these sudden changes. If you look at like the 10-day forecast from the general forecast system, they constantly change every few hours rather dramatically, because they can't predict these things, these chaotic changes, which cause the weather patterns to change rather dramatically. A month ago, the US government put out a January forecast for the US, which was going to be very warm in the southeastern US, and now they're buried in a foot of snow in Florida. So these people don't know what they're doing. These models are worthless. And they're very good for a few days, but beyond that, their worth breaks down very rapidly.
Now, I know Kevin's got loaded up with a bunch of questions. Kevin, you might as well just dive right in, mate, and let's get into it.
Look, I've actually been cheating a bit, Tony. I've been going back and watching your videos on, the possibilities of fraud. You did a brilliant series, which, you had part 1, 2, and 3, but there's actually even 4, 5, and 6. So I just wonder if you could sort of, if you can pull back the cobwebs and expound on that, I'd be great. I'd be very grateful.
Okay, well, I've always been interested in weather since I was a little kid. And my boss, I was working in Los Alamos as a geologist, geochemist, actually, back in around 1980. And my boss was a chemist, and he introduced me to the idea of global warming. And I believed it. I was a true believer in global warming for many years, until I started looking at the data myself, and I started realizing that what these government scientists were doing with the data was just absolutely obscene. They wanted to show warming, and they're saying if you torture the data enough, it will confess, and that's exactly what they were doing. It was just like the old days where they would torture people to get the confession they wanted. They're doing the same thing with data. All these temperature graphs and maps, and you look at it, they're not using legitimate methods to generate them. And it's unfortunate people on both sides of the political aisle tend to cite them and believe that, you always see these things that the Earth has warmed 1.5 degrees since the Little Ice Age, but the mathematics they used to come up with that is just complete nonsense. So I delved into it and done a lot of work with the raw data, and what they're saying is just not true, and it's not supportable mathematically or scientifically.
When we look at the temperature records, I mean, some of these records have been kept for over a century. Whether it be here in Australia or there in the US or other places of the world. I've heard you talk in previous interviews that they've actually taken a lot of that, a lot of those temperature records and falsified them. A lot of the weather stations that they're using are not existent anymore, but they still use ways of including somehow they pull data out of the sky and use that. Can you explain that and expand upon that a little bit further?
Well, there's many different types of abuse going on. In Australia, what's really interesting is around 1957, I think CSIRO published a paper showing how temperatures had declined dramatically since the late 19th century in Australia, with a number of different stations at Alice Springs and Burke and a few other places. And they all showed this very strong decline in temperatures. And they had a very good explanation for it. It had to do with the fact that Australia had become wetter, and during the 19th century it was very dry, and so they were getting higher temperatures. And it was a very sound methodology. But then a few years ago, right, BOM just erased all the temperatures before 1910. They just started pretending they don't exist anymore. So that's a pretty egregious abuse which goes on in Australia. There's just pretending that the temperatures don't exist prior to 1910. January 1896 was probably the hottest January on record in Southeast Australia, and it was very widely documented. There were stories in the Australian press about birds dropping dead out of the trees. Lots of people were dying, and the New York Times wrote an article describing it as the hottest of hot waves on record. They said it was 127 degrees in Fahrenheit in Adelaide. This has all been erased. If you look at the BOM record maximum temperatures for each state from 1995, they showed, like in Western Australia and in Victoria, they were both set in 1906, and now since then they've erased those records. In New South Wales, it was at Burke in 1877. That record's been erased. So erasure of data is a really big problem. In the United States, they haven't so much erased the data, but they tamper with it. They massively tamper with it to turn a long-term cooling trend into a warming trend. So there's many different types of abuse of data. And I could write an encyclopedia about all the different things that are going on.
Tony, I'm interested in how you get hold of the data. You're a regular sleuth. I'm very interested to know how you do it, because I would like to actually copy you.
Well, the good news is that NOAA still makes the raw data available. I can still get the raw data available from Australia. You can get it from the United States. You can get it from all over the world and do serious analysis on it. That isn't the data which the public sees. They do massive manipulation before they generate their graphs. But fortunately, I am able to get that data from NOAA.
So NOAA's got Australian data as well. Oh,
yeah,
how
they've
fascinating is that?
Yeah. So I work when I'm looking at Australia, I work directly with the raw temperature data.
Of interest, my father owned a grocery store, corner grocery store, a post office, and a news agency. And he used to go out and measure temperature and also measure the water. We had a rain gauge at the back of the house. So I must probably have some roots in all of this. He was a member of the PMG in those days.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. It's just amazing. It was straight out of Orwell's 1984, how they've just erased history or rewritten it. I mean, it's almost like they used Orwell as their operating manual.
What do you see as? I see that President Trump has called it the new green. He called it the new green scam, and Viva Fry said he missed a joke there. He could have called it the new green steel rather than Badil. But what do you think? Are you hopeful that matters are now going to be revealed?
Well, I certainly hope so. I was hopeful during the first Trump administration, and that really didn't happen. But this time, I think he's got more experience. He's apparently clearing a lot of the dead weight out of the White House, the people who prevented things from happening the first time. So
I would love to see you, Will Happer, John Clauser, and Richard Lindzen as a delegation, and make it a PR event. Go and see President Trump, and actually sit down and have it recorded, video recorded, where you can just talk to him, because he strikes me as being a person who is very approachable. And this is a matter of national importance. I mean, this has so far cost the world trillions of dollars, and they are destroying our electricity grid at this moment by injecting intermittent power into the grid. I mean, it's just nuts. It's crazy stuff.
Yeah. Well, Will Happer was Trump's de facto science advisor during his first term, and he had a very difficult time getting anything done. He was kept away from the president. He had a lot of other complaints about what was going on there. So hopefully President Trump's more experienced now, and he understands better about who his friends are and who's undermining him, because he didn't have the support he needed during his first administration.
Right. Now, here in Australia, we've got all through 4 major political parties, that is the Liberals, the Nationals, Labor and the Greens, all committing to net zero, which to me is just the ultimate in stupidity. And once again, I wonder, would it be possible for us to arrange a Zoom for you, Professor Happer, and Richard Lindzen and John Clauser to meet with Peter Dutton and, in fact, Littleproud, and even invite the Greens and Labor to sit in on it. And we have a conference which is public.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that.
We could be saving the world here, Tony.
Yeah.
Well, Kevin, you mentioned all those parties. You didn't mention the teals, and that's a big problem here in Australia, that this teal independent movement has popped up, that's heavily funded by the renewable sector, and they're really blocking our Conservative Party from getting into government, and they're pushing ahead. They have policies such as reducing emissions by 75% by 2035. They want to get rid of all coal and gas projects and oil projects. So we're dealing, and they're pushing back against nuclear energy as well. They're trying to block that from being implemented here in Australia. Now, a couple of them, the most notable ones, this is Allegra Spender. She's posted this on her Instagram page, declaring that 2024 was the hottest year on record. It was also the first calendar year in which Earth exceeded 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. So that's what Allegra's saying. Another one is Zali Steggall. Zali Steggall also put this on her Instagram page, where she's put up this graph here that looks like temperature records, temperatures going off the scale. And so again, making the claim that 2024 was the hottest year on record, and they're using this as political capital to further their movement. What do you have to say about all of that?
Well, like I said before, those graphs are just completely fake. The way they're political propaganda, largely generated by the U.S. government, and they're not an accurate representation of what the weather's done over the past 150 years. But they've been very effective, right? So that combined with this whole consensus nonsense, they make these ridiculous, meaningless graphs, and then they say that you're not allowed to question them because 97% of scientists say this is correct. So it's very high-powered propaganda, disinformation campaign, which largely has been run out of the U.S. government. And the good news is that President Donald Trump's been calling this out for a long time. I mean, he was calling it the climate scam 13 years ago on Twitter. So he's understood what was going on for a very long time, and hopefully he's in a position now where he can actually do something about it.
This brings me back. Maybe like I was talking fancifully about getting the you four distinguished chaps to confront the political leaders here, and rightly Stephen has suggested the teals should be involved in that as well. But if we could get you and President Trump and people from NOAA in a room, fully televised, and I mean, they would have nowhere to go, nowhere to duck.
Yeah.
They can't say, like the CIA or the FBI, the matter's under investigation, and therefore we can't make a comment. They've got nowhere to run. I think that's the way to. If we could pull that off, it would be a world event, and it would save Western civilization.
Well, what they do is, Kevin, what they say is, there's things that are wrong with the data, so we have to change it. And in Australia, they say there's things that's wrong with the older data, so we have to ignore it. And those kinds of arguments are actually really difficult to deal with. What they do is they take, the big lie always has an element of truth to it, right? So they take something, a complaint, which has a small element of truth, and use it as an excuse to tamper with or erase the data. And then it becomes an issue of mathematics, which, you can't really argue mathematics. With politicians, their eyes are going to glaze over and they won't know what you're talking about. And they're just going to believe what the government agencies say. So it's actually a very difficult problem because there's a grain of truth to what they're saying. But it's being abused, taken way out of proportion, being abused to just achieve propaganda objectives.
Who is the key person in the administration that would oversee this?
Well, the head of NOAA, and that's that's sort of the person who the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration.
Do you know who Trump has appointed?
I don't know if he's in a position to actually change the leadership of that. Is the problem?
Well, there must be a secretary of a department there.
Yeah, there's a head of NOAA, but it's not that simple to get rid of them because he would have done.
Oh no, I'm not after getting rid of them. I'm just simply after the secretary of that particular department pinholing these chaps.
Oh yeah. The Department of the Interior. He will appoint the Secretary of the Interior, but the problem is that NOAA is under them, and getting rid of these civil service people and in these agencies is actually quite difficult, apparently.
Stop funding them and create a new department.
Well, the problem is that NOAA does a lot of important work, like the National Weather Service. We need them, so you can't just get rid of NOAA. But their climate people are problematic, and they have a huge amount of momentum because everybody's been brainwashed to believe this nonsense. Every school child in the world's watched Al Gore's science fiction movie, and they're bombarded with this from the press, this climate change, climate emergency. Now it's global boiling nonsense. So we've got a real fundamental problem. You've got a whole generation of people who've been raised on, believing that this nonsense is true.
You were in Climate the movie, and we talked to Professor Happer about that as well.
Yeah.
When we talk about school children. That's where my focus is, because I feel like they're heavily being indoctrinated. A lot of these people are going to be future leaders across the world, and they're going to be believing a lot of this stuff. And who's going to be around to really push back against it? Did you get any traction with the movie in getting the message through to our youth that this whole thing is a scam?
I don't have any feel for that. I mean, the movie was great. You know, Martin did a great job with that. And there's going to be some more movies this year, shorter ones.
Oh, good.
You know, we're going to be focused specifically on these issues of data manipulation. So, you know, we'll see what's going to happen. But it would really sort of the key thing is getting into the schools and getting these horrible agendas of these woke agendas out of the schools, because you know, as long as school kids are being indoctrinated, it's going to be very difficult to really cure this cancer once and for all. So,
you've been in this battle for, you know, a long time now, and you've probably been incredibly frustrated with the direction that this debate has gone. What do you think has been the main problem as to why the real scientists like yourself haven't been able to propagate the truth and get that out there to people? And this climate narrative has just gone beyond what it should ever have gone beyond, to the point now where Australia is being carpeted with solar panel and wind projects and ripping up agricultural land to put in high voltage transmission lines and completely destroying our economy. What's been lacking on, I guess, your side? Has it been funding? Has it been maybe some star power to get out there and say something? Has it been maybe people being silenced? What do you see as the biggest problem holding you back?
well, the biggest problem is just that superstition about climate has been a problem with the human race forever. You know, in Europe, they burned thousands of witches for cooking the weather. You know, the Aztecs sacrificed thousands of people because they thought that was the way to end droughts. I posted an article from the Brisbane Courier from 1871 today titled "Imaginary Changes of Climate." And it talked about how people keeping the weather records always describe every month as being the coldest, hottest, wettest, windiest ever known. So that this is the problem is that the weather is constantly changing, and we always get extreme weather. People want to blame it on something. So yeah, there it is. People want to blame it on something, and so they blame it on witches. You know, with Noah's flood, it was blamed on man's sin. You know, most cultures have a flood story like that where humans did something bad, and so God had to flood the earth. So people have been raised with this since they were children. In 16th century in Europe, they were certain that bad weather was caused by witches. So we're not. It's the same superstition and the same sort of primitive thinking by humans, which we've always had. And every generation imagines they're very sophisticated, and they think we have all these wonderful scientists telling them it's caused by carbon dioxide. But you know, it's the same primitive belief system, and which humans have always had, and it's very hard to get past that.
When it comes to measuring temperature, we've talked about the temperature records from the past. It's always the inclination of younger people to say, oh, well, people in the past didn't know how to do things. They weren't as sophisticated as us. They didn't pay as much attention to detail as we do. Is that the case? Or and I know from, you know, you might do some philosophy reading or scientific reading. People, you know, 100 years ago, though, they paid a lot of attention to detail. You only have to look at artwork and how much detail they put into that artwork. Where are you on all of that when it comes to the temperature records from the past?
Yeah, I'm always inclined to believe that people in the past were much more meticulous. You know, Einstein came up with this theory of special relativity in 1905. But they want us to believe that people weren't smart enough to read a thermometer back then. It doesn't make any sense. It's ridiculous, things that were done. There was a doctor in Philadelphia in 1790 who kept very detailed temperature records and took him 3 times a day. And January 1790 was the warmest January on record in Philadelphia. It was like 70 degrees Fahrenheit day after day. Boys were swimming in the rivers there, and those rivers are frozen now. So, we have very good detailed records, but people want to believe that somehow because we have computers now or something, we're smarter. But there's not much evidence to support that idea. I think people.
Yeah, I often say that in relation to a trend, if you're driving a car with a speedometer that's not reading precisely the right speed, if the speedometer shows an increased speed, then you've increased your speed, even though the speed it's reading is not entirely accurate.
Yeah.
And therefore, these graphs, which show a gradual downward trend for 140 years in the case of Australia, regardless of whether the absolute was accurate, the trends are, I believe, immutable, that we have been in a gradual decline of temperature.
Well, certainly from like the 1880s, from 1878 down to the 1930s or so, there was a decline in temperatures. I think there's been warming in Australia since then, probably, back close to the levels they were around the turn of the, beginning of the 20th century. But like I said, that data has been erased. The world's record for 100-degree days was set at Marble Bar, West Australia, I think in 1924. And it was like 200 consecutive days over 100 degrees. BOM has erased that. That they've erased their page talking about it.
Yeah. We have a politician here called Craig Kelly, whom you may know. He's been most vocal about exactly that. And he went through the handwritten records from Australian archives and found that the transcription had been inaccurate. And the inaccuracies appear to have been targeted. They weren't inaccuracies which were trivial.
Yeah.
They were significant inaccuracies.
Yeah. I know Craig. I communicate with him quite a bit, and he's given me a lot of good stuff.
When he was in Parliament, he did have people who he could get to work for him. Right now, he's again running for Parliament. He's going to run as a senator for the Libertarian Party in New South Wales.
Cool.
And I wish him every success.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever seen the video of. I gave a speech at Parliament's House right for the 2016 U.S. election with Malcolm Roberts.
Bob Carter? Was Bob Carter involved? Bob Carter sadly passed away. You would remember Bob Carter, a professor in paleontology?
Yeah. No, he wasn't there. It was Malcolm Roberts.
All right.
And myself and Tim Ball, who's also passed since then.
Yeah.
We gave a presentation in Parliament House. It was like right for the U.S. election in November 2016, and it was pretty fun. We had a great time humiliating certain members of the press.
We're gonna have to dig that video up and have a look at it.
Oh, I think so. Yeah.
The thing that was great was there was some reporter there who started accusing Malcolm Roberts of being anti-Semitic.
Oh, that's right. I remember that, and they pointed out that you have a Jewish background.
Yeah, so I just tapped Malcolm on the shoulder and I said, I went over the microphone and said, I'm a Jew and I find your attack on Senator Roberts to be incredibly offensive.
That is just a beautiful moment. That's so good. That's wonderful.
It was pretty fun, and they pretty much shut down the press that day. So.
And these people are meant to be journalists. You would think they would have done a bit of a background check on you, or at least known that going into it.
You know, Michael Mann, the guy who invented the hockey stick, he once accused me of being anti-Semitic. It's based on the idea that climate deniers are anti-Semitic. You read some article about people are just crazy. I mean, never has anything to do with science or climate. It's just they're just pushing their woke agenda and pushing things to keep their money coming in. So,
is
Tony,
that the
since
motivation?
1998, the BOM decided that they would change from analog to digital. And
Yeah.
they actually changed the size of the Stevenson screen, containers in which the instrumentation was housed. Would you know a lady called Dr. Jennifer Maurassi?
Yeah, I know Jennifer.
Yeah, she's done some excellent work. She's actually written about the ones that I've seen, it's a 4-part sort of series examining how our temperature records are broken because of the fact that they didn't supposedly run the analog and the digital alongside each other to see that they were recording equivalent amounts. Because obviously, if you change out the speedometer in your car, you're going to be getting a different speed possibly being registered, or you put different tires on your car, whatever. If you change the circumstances, the readings could go quite differently. From what I've been able to ascertain, and this comes from people like Craig Kelly as well, the boxes which they put them in register about 1.5 degrees centigrade higher. I think that's about 2.7 Fahrenheit. And if you then make a 2.7 degree adjustment downwards, then the graph which you produced, it's a continuous line. I mean, the trend is still in keeping, that we are cooling.
Yeah, well, that's, and that is the scam with erasing the pre-1910 temperatures. They say they weren't using Stevenson screens back then, so there was rating too high. But it's the same point you were just making. It wasn't like there was a step change. There was a steady decline in temperatures from like 1880 to 1910. So that's not the kind of thing you'd see as a result of the bad housing around the thermometer. And the other thing was that then they make the argument that the paint was deteriorating, and so they were getting more sunlight and it was warming it up. But that would be the opposite. That would cause warming instead of cooling.
Exactly.
So none of their arguments hold any water. It's just they don't want to acknowledge the hot temperatures from the 19th century in Australia, so they just erase them.
I don't know the truth of this, but Craig at one stage indicated that there was the possibility that they'd painted some of these screens in the inside with black paint. As it is, putting the louvers closer to your instrumentation, radiation is related to a function of distance, that would have a warming effect. But if they also went to the point of painting them black, as you would know, a black radiator will emit radiation to a much higher percentage than a white one.
Yeah. Well, just the whole abuse of data, the abuse of the scientific method is just absolutely horrific. And it's pervasive around much of academia, not just in climate, but in many other things, because their funding depends on getting results, which the people providing the funding want. So they will torture the data to get the results they need to keep their funding coming in.
Yeah, Simon Holmes a Court, who funded the teals, he funded them to $20 million.
Yeah.
He, I suspect, is making quite a lot of money out of renewables, out of the unreliables, I'd like to call them. But yeah. And really, this is another tragedy. The Communist Party of China have their stated aim to be the supreme power of the world by 2049.
Yeah.
And if I were an officer at the desk of unrestricted warfare in the People's Liberation Army, I would be cheering madly at what Germany's doing to itself and what Australia is doing to itself. And I would now be weeping in my waste bin about the fact that Trump got elected.
Yeah. Well, hopefully Trump can follow through and defeat this. I mean, he's up against some pretty powerful forces. Like I said, it's largely the fact that the public has been so propagandized. I mean, even conservative Republicans treat these temperature graphs as if they're real, and they're not. The whole thing is just fake.
There's a characteristic in the Australian culture, which is that we can't stand bullshitters. And once we detect that we've been bullshitted to, the response is really quite aggressive. And I'm hoping that we can reach that tipping point. I believe that the people in the street, if they were to hear you and the other three gentlemen, which I previously mentioned, debating, or not even debating, just confronting our political leadership on video, then that would be sufficient to turn the majority of thinking Australians in the right direction.
Yeah.
And the result, as I say, will be quite aggressive. They will not be happy if they think that they have been deceived. And our power bills have gone up 6 times the CPI since 2007. All the while being told that these unreliable sources of electricity would be cheaper.
Yeah.
We've been lied to. And, don't believe your lying eyes type situation. It's really atrocious.
Yeah, and they just repeat the lies over and over again. The other couple, yesterday, I think, or the day before, in the United Kingdom, wind and solar were only producing 1% of their electricity. And they're talking about going 100%. What are they going to do? The wind stops flowing, they're going to shut down 99% of the country. It's absolutely insane.
Well, we're having problems with stability as well, which you'd be well aware of as an electrical engineer.
Yeah.
We've had a number of companies have to put in filtering on their input because their machinery is quite sensitive to changes in frequency or to Fourier components coming in on their sine wave.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole renewables thing doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's terrible for the environment. It's not reliable. And I think one of the biggest problems is that 20 years from now, we're going to have this huge mess, all these broken solar panels and broken wind turbines. There's not going to be any money to clean it up. We're going to completely destroy the countryside, and we've got a huge environmental problem with toxic waste. These wind turbines have massive concrete footprints in the ground, and nobody's going to clean them up. They're going to look back and say, were they completely mad back then? And I think the correct answer will be yes.
The point you raise is a very interesting one. I had a long discussion with a fellow yesterday on something quite closely related to this. It's, imagine that we were to be successful in convincing everyday Australians that this whole thing was just one huge scam. We're left then with, we're talking billions, we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars of investment in solar panels and windmills that dot our countryside. And so that caused me to think, look, are there applications for intermittent power where we could at least get some of our money back by using the intermittent power that these things produce to, for example, pump water? We have a real problem here. If we could move our surplus water from the eastern seaboard over into the west, we would triple our farmland to the great benefit of this country and, in fact, the world. And maybe that's what we should do. What do you think?
Well, and certainly the key problem is energy storage. Being able to take the energy that you're generating from wind and use it when you need it. Batteries, this idea of dealing with batteries is insane. That's not going to happen. But things like pump storage or pumping water or, perhaps generating hydrogen, those kinds of ideas.
Well, let's pretend for a moment that we're talking about moving water from the eastern seaboard to the west. All I would need is a large battery only to stay alive long enough for me to, in a controlled fashion, wind down the pumps.
Right.
Or in a controlled fashion, augment what is being produced so as to keep things at a relatively steady state for a very short period of time.
Yeah. Well, the thing about that is, that's an application which doesn't require power all the time.
Exactly.
Unlike civilization, which does require power all the time.
Can you think of any others, though, Tony? Anything that comes immediately to your mind that
Well,
we could utilise our unreliable intermittent power to do something constructive?
Well, yeah, pump storage, like I said, pump storage,
Yeah.
or possibly something like generating hydrogen. If they could take these offshore wind turbines and generate hydrogen from it, that's another way where you could potentially store energy and not need to have it going all the time.
Have you looked into the generation of hydrogen, the economics of it?
Well, I mean, hydrogen's problematic because it's a very small molecule and it's hard to contain it. It tends to leak, and the process of generating the hydrogen can be corrosive. So there's a lot of issues with it, but at least it's something which is plausible. It's an idea. There may be engineering problems or scientific problems, but it's plausible. Running a civilization or pumping it into batteries is just nonsense. That's not something you can do.
I just want to bring this up because this is what we're talking about. This is the AEMO website. This is for New South Wales at the moment. So if we look at the energy mix, black coal is producing 44%, but solar is actually producing 43% of our power right now. A lot of that would be probably rooftop solar. Yeah. Wind is producing 7%. Now and battery is producing 0. The problem is tonight when the sun goes down, that solar output is going to go to 0.
Right.
You can't turn the coal plants off throughout the day because they take too long to start up. You're going to need that power at night, which is meaning they're pumping this energy from these coal plants into the ground because we have excess energy. That's pushing up the cost of producing coal. So this is a massive problem here in Australia. Introducing these intermittent energy sources into our mix is increasing the production of energy, and we're seeing that in our electricity bills. And they're just saying that batteries is going to solve it all. Well, we're looking at this. Batteries is not contributing anything to the mix at the moment, and I doubt it will change overnight. And a lot of people say that the battery technology will just not be available. What are your thoughts on all of that?
Well, did you see what happened at the world's largest battery last week in California?
Had a fire.
Yeah, it caught on fire. They had to shut down the coast highway. Second time that's happened. I think it happened a couple of years ago as well. I used to drive past their beautiful, when I lived in California, I used to drive past their beautiful coal-fired power plant. They shut it down, replaced with this huge lithium battery. And everyone who's ever taken chemistry knows that these metals like lithium and sodium and magnesium, there's light alkali metals, are very reactive. I knew a guy who blew up a toilet by wrapping sodium in toilet paper, flushing it down the toilet, and running away. And lithium is very similar to sodium in that regard. They're inherently dangerous because they like to react with water and oxygen, and they're explosive, and that's what's happened in California a couple times. It's insane to imagine
they want
that
to put these batteries in people's homes.
Yeah, and then they want to put it in airplanes. Have an airplane which is powered by exploding batteries. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
just coming back to hydrogen for a moment, in order to convert water into hydrogen, you really have to use distilled water, because if you've got any impurities in the water, it will poison your electrodes. So the first thing you've got to do is evaporate water and then condense it.
Right.
And then you can turn it into hydrogen. Then you've got the problem that hydrogen really has very little energy when it's in its nascent state at atmospheric pressure.
Yeah.
So you've got to compress it to something like, in your measurements, 4,000 pounds per square inch in a container. And as you rightly point out, the container will suffer from what's called hydrogen embrittlement over a period of time if it's a metal container, like a steel container. And, I actually wrote to the Department of Defense suggesting that we should look at converting municipal waste into liquid fuel. And I got a letter back from the Department of Defense telling me that they're looking for clean energy to drive military vehicles. And as an ex-military officer, I'm sort of envisaging driving around the battlefield with a 4,000 pounds per square inch cylinder of hydrogen in the back of my armored vehicle, waiting for someone to penetrate my canopy. It's just unbelievable that thinking people are even going along with this.
Yeah, did you see the stories about the Los Angeles Fire Department electric fire trucks? So they've got all these electric fire trucks, and they have to go back to take them back and recharge them for quite a few hours before they could use them again. So half the time their fire trucks weren't available during the fires. If they were just regular diesel trucks, they could have brought a tanker out there, refueled them on the spot, and it kept them going, pretty much continuously. But because they're electric powered, they couldn't do that. So
the only thing you could really do is have a battery pack, so that, for example, you go back and you stick a battery pack into your vehicle. But a battery pack's going to weigh about like 1.5 ton as a minimum, and then for a Bushmaster, I think it comes in at about 5 ton.
Yeah, it's the idea of moving vehicles with batteries. It's good for golf carts and for people who just drive around town, they just want to recharge at home. It's probably really good technology for them. But for when you have needs where you have to keep the thing running for a long time or travel long distances, battery-powered vehicles don't make a lot of sense.
Now, your YouTube page receives a lot of attention. You've got a lot of followers on there. I'm just looking at this video here, and you've just launched this program, visitech.ai.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about what this program does?
Yeah, so I've been doing programming using computers to analyze and visualize very large data sets for more than 50 years, actually. And recently, the sort of technology with all the with the very fast graphics, and there's other technologies which have come out, it made it possible to put this just into a web page. So I've released this. The idea is that being able to give people the ability to analyze and visualize very large data sets extremely quickly and automate the process is something which I think people will find tremendously valuable. I just launched it a couple of days ago, and I'm trying to get people to understand what it is. And I've made a few videos showing how you can use it to understand weather data and a few other types of data, and just starting to get some interest in that.
And can people download that themselves, or do they need is it a subscription or something?
Well, that's the cool thing, is you don't have to download it. It's just off a web page, app.visitech.ai. You can do a lot of the stuff with the weather for free. In order to get the more general data handling, data visualization, you'll have to get a subscription, which right now is $20 a month. We might lower that a little bit, but a lot of it's going to be getting people to understand how powerful this is. It takes sort of intractable data problems and actually makes them trivially easy to understand, but requires a little bit of a learning curve. So that's what I'm putting out these videos for.
And when we're talking about AI, it seems like the world's moving in that direction, but it's going to be consuming a lot of energy. Even Donald Trump was saying that it's probably going to double the energy needed to have AI, and also cryptocurrency as well in the near future. I'm looking at it and thinking that the Earth is going to have an energy famine if we don't introduce some more baseload power, but we seem to be moving in the direction of wind and solar. Where do you see things going with the introduction of AI across the world?
Well, it's really interesting. A few years ago, the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado, built their supercomputing center for running their climate models here, where I live in Cheyenne, Wyoming. And the reason they did that was because we have coal-fired electricity in Wyoming, which is much cheaper than Colorado green energy. So the people running the climate models are running their climate models on coal-fired electricity because they can't afford to run it on their crazy green energy in Colorado. And Facebook and Microsoft are both building huge data centers for AI here in Cheyenne for the same reason, that we have cheap coal-fired electricity. Of course, they won't admit that. They put up a bunch of solar panels to make it look like they're doing something green, but the real reason is because we have cheap coal-fired electricity. Wyoming is the United States' largest coal producer, and so our electricity is relatively inexpensive here as a result. And so no matter how much they bluster and lie about it, the bottom line is that they want coal-fired electricity, and that's why they're here, and that's where, and that's where things are going to end up ultimately. No matter how much they try to fool themselves, they're going to have to deal with reality. Like I said, the problem with they build all this wind and solar and say it's going to replace the coal and natural gas, but it's not, for the simple reason that they're not reliable. You can't shut down the coal and natural gas power plants, because when the wind stops blowing, you have to keep the country running. So now what they're doing by building all these, like in the UK, it's particularly bad. They're building all these wind turbines and solar panels, but they can't actually replace their natural gas plants, because they have to keep those running all the time in order for when the wind stops blowing. So with each new wind turbine, with each new solar panel, all they're doing is increasing the cost of their infrastructure. They can never decrease their. If they could actually replace their natural gas power plant, then maybe they could reduce their costs, but they can't because they're not reliable.
The
So
election.
Yeah, go ahead.
The federal election's coming up very, very quickly here in Australia, and the opposition leader Peter Dutton is going to go to the electorate with his nuclear plan of building 7 reactors around the country. Currently, there's a ban on nuclear energy here in Australia. With everything that we're talking about, what do you have any opinion on whether we should go down the nuclear path here in Australia? It's going to be a huge issue coming up with the election. There's going to be a lot of pushback. There's going to be a lot of support. It's going to be a big debate. What are your thoughts?
Well, ultimately, some type of nuclear energy is going to become essential. I don't think there's any rush for it. We have huge reserves of coal and natural gas. I think pushing forward with nuclear, is not necessarily the best idea. I worked on the safety analysis report for the Department of Energy's nuclear waste disposal site here in the United States, and there's definitely issues with nuclear waste disposal. We really haven't solved that problem, and I don't really see the need to push into nuclear. I don't see, I'm not someone who thinks cutting carbon emissions is a sensible thing to be thinking about. And we have huge reserves of coal and natural gas, and why not just stick with something which we have and it works? There's certainly nuclear power plants. They're doing a very good job in France. The nuclear power plants are very important. Arizona largely runs off of a nuclear power plant. So there's places where it's working very well. In Ontario, the nuclear plants work very well. But I don't think there's any need to push forward into nuclear, rush into nuclear while we have, these massive reserves of coal and natural gas. We should be focusing on running, burning coal in a clean fashion, and we have that technology, and using natural gas. We have massive reserves of natural gas frozen into these sea floors, and we can be focusing on that sort of energy instead. So I'm not a huge proponent of pushing into nuclear quickly. I mean, I don't think there's any reason to.
It's the same here in Australia. We have huge amounts of coal and gas, but it's all getting locked up. And for example, our banks are not supporting any new coal projects. They're not funding money to coal projects. I mean, everything's getting so politicized, and the coal industry is really on its knees, despite the fact that these teal members that I alluded to or mentioned before are putting out correspondence saying that the coal lobby has somehow got their grip on Parliament, or how come we're not building any more coal plants? But look, we're at the hour mark now. Kevin, I'm going to hand it over to you to give the final question to Tony, because you've helped facilitate this interview. Go have a go, mate. What's your final question to Tony?
Well, actually, the very first thing I'd like to say is that I donated $100 to Tony last year, and I'm not flash with cash, and I would implore everybody to go to Tony's site and donate some money to him, because I use an awful lot of his material, and I am ever so grateful, Tony, for everything you've done. I can't remember when I first became aware of you, but it must be sometime like 15 years ago or more. You just were so fantastic. So if anybody is, if we have any traction at all, and I hope we have here on Commanding the Narrative, please go to Tony's site. And even a small donation would make a big difference. I often say, if 1 million people gave us $10, we'd have $10 million, and we could do an awful lot of publicity with $10 million. I'm actually trying to raise $40 million, but that's another story, for exactly what we're talking about. And that is, publicity and trying to turn this country around, because if we stay on the same track, we're dead. We're finished. We're going to become vassals to foreigners. So really, I don't have any other questions to ask you, but I do implore the listeners and viewers to go to Tony's site. I can assure you that I have looked into everything Tony has done. Obviously, I'm limited in my abilities to do that, but I cannot fault anything that you've done, Tony. Your research and everything is without blemish. So thank you very, very much, Tony, for that. And thank you for coming on this show. I'm really grateful.
I enjoyed talking with you, and thanks for inviting me, Kevin. Appreciate it.
So Tony's website is realclimatescience.com. Is that the best place to go, Tony? I know you've also got a YouTube page that I mentioned before.
Yeah, I probably do most of my communications on X these days, tonyclimate. YouTube. Really, the best way to support my work right now actually would be to subscribe to app.visitech.ai.
Could you say that again, please, Tony, and slowly, please?
Sorry, it's app.visitech, visitech.ai.
We'll get that from you later, and have you got it there? Yeah, great. Yeah, I just want to make sure that people can, that it's convenient for them to find you. That's all.
Yeah, I've got it at the top of my X page, and you can find it pretty easily on my.
Oh, excellent. Okay.
Yeah, but that's if I can make that business successful, then I'll be set. And once you get something in return, you get an extremely powerful and valuable tool as well.
Right.
Everybody.
Well, good luck in that.
Pardon?
I said good luck with that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, the best of luck. And just think about whether we could get you in a delegation with those other three fine gentlemen to go and see President Trump, and take along the Secretary for the Environment, the Interior, rather.
Yeah.
And just get you into a room, and then they can bring in people who have a differing opinion, and you can debate that in front of President Trump, and I think he would be very impressed.
Yeah, it would be awesome if we could do that.
I hope at the end of it he looks at them and says, "You're fired."
Well, that would
famous words.
Well, if he got rid of the climate groups at NOAA and NASA, that would be a huge first step. I mean,
is that the Goddard Institute of Space Studies you're talking about?
They're just absolutely horrible. and the people at NOAA who are putting out the climate propaganda. The problem with that is that the people who keep the temperature records are a part of that same group. So you can't just get rid of them, because you need to keep the important parts of them, but get rid of the people who are tampering with the data and
just contract it out.
Yeah.
We've decided that we're closing your section. You don't have a job any longer because we believe it would be a better service if we contracted out to the best tender. Thank you very much for your efforts. Goodbye, everybody.
Yeah, the people who are generating those fake graphs, which you showed earlier, those people have got to go. These people,
yes.
They're the people who are keeping this whole thing going.
Yep.
The public believes that these graphs are meaningful, and they're not. It's just
everything hinges around America, actually.
Yeah.
If we could get you to change, well, not you personally, but if we could get America to change, to actually say, look, this has all been one huge hoax. In fact, Will Happer says, I don't like calling it a hoax, it's a scam, because a hoax has some limit, some degree of humor in it.
Right.
I always remember that. But if we could get that revealed, then the whole thing falls down. Everything we're doing in Australia here is predicated upon the idea that carbon dioxide is somehow a nasty gas causing uncontrollable warming of the atmosphere, when all the temperature data shows we're cooling.
Yeah, there's the whole thing is just based on complete nonsense. In the year 1901, Newt Angstrom, the physicist Newt Angstrom, demonstrated experimentally that increasing the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere won't have any material effect on Earth's radiative balance. But somehow the scam has kept going for another 125 years.
That's right.
And it's just one of the most amazing stories of how weak, humanity can be, or how superstitious and weak we are, that we can allow these sort of things to go on. People see bad weather. We get a typhoon or a hurricane or snowstorm or whatever, and someone has to get blamed for it, right? So they blame carbon dioxide, or they blame Trump, or they blame Republicans or coal, and it gives people a good feeling that it's not my fault. It's the evil Donald Trump. He made this hurricane happen, and it's just human nature to have these sort of superstitions.
Well, Tony, it's been awesome to have you on today. Hopefully we can have you back again in the future at some point. It's also been awesome that we've been able to get this out to the audience, and hopefully the audience will share it far and wide. I say it that every single time. Please share this out, everyone. It's important that, particularly the younger generation, I think it's important that they hear that a lot of this has been going on. And if we can get this out to everyone that we possibly can, it would be fantastic, but we really rely on the audience to be able to do that. So thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Tony. I really appreciate today, and we'll see you all next time.
Thank you, Ted.